Welcome back to Still Unbelievable. I am your host, David Johnson, joined by another host.
Hello, this is Andrew Knight. Welcome back to Still Unbelievable.
And we're joined by yet another host.
Yep, this is Sarah, ready to punch the patriarchy and bust some balls. There you go, since we're talking about gender.
It started early.
Hell yeah.
It started early.
Yeehaw!
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, God. All right.
It's a good start, hey? It's a good start.
I already
Solid.
need a sandwich. So today we're going to be discussing the just released Unbelievable episode from Justin Brierley. If we ever put up a website, you'll find the link in our show notes. This will probably, most of you will be hearing this because I will drop it in the Skeptics and Seekers feed, just so that most of you will see it. There's been a lot of attention behind it. I'm still working on getting this its own iTunes presence, so please be patient with that. And when we get that, then we will have an official launch of this show. The Unbelievable episode that we're working off of is Unbelievable, Me Too, and the Church. Egalitarianism versus complementarian. Natalie Collins and Phil Moore. And with that, let's dive in, guys.
Okay, both notions are stupid.
And the end.
Mm.
Okay.
Sorry,
okay,
you
let
said
me-
dive in.
Let me refer to my notes. I think that there's more.
Yeah, there's more we can squeeze out of this, surely.
Well,
I mean,
but actually, it does bring up a good point, which I don't think anyone took the time to prep, which is, what is egalitarianism and what is complementarianism? What is that, according to the show that we've listened to all probably 2 or 3 times?
They pretty much sounded the same thing in the end, didn't they? They were sort of saying, we're equal, but we're kind of different. So, big news flash.
So what I drew from this was Phil is suggesting through complementarianism that men and women are different but equal under his notion of Scripture, whereas Natalie sees Scripture as a preservation of the same rights for men and women. One of the places this was most prevalent in Phil's thoughts was the role of leadership in the church. So in his complementarian view, women were accepted as leaders in the church, but not the top leadership spots. So those were reserved specifically for elders, and women were not allowed. And also in Phil's view, from the complementarian perspective, he seemed to believe that the biological differences between men and women were of such a nature that women were naturally restricted from certain things, that women simply didn't have the right personality or mental makeup or spiritual framework. I'm not sure what he was basing it on, but Phil definitely saw restrictions on women. And I think, to be fair, he'd say certain restrictions on men as well. And that was the view of complementarianism, that men and women complement each other through being different somehow, though I think his definition of how was pretty poor. And Natalie, on the other hand, saw the expression of human traits to be as broad as there are individuals. In fact, I think she said so.
Yeah.
And so her view in her egalitarian view, men and women could swap roles however they saw fit. And she read the Bible as being a book that allowed for egalitarianism. As a prior evangelical fundamentalist, I think she was dead wrong about how she read the Bible, and I think Phil was right about his reading, but both views are quackery.
Okay,
and that was the egalitarian versus complementarian expression as I saw it in the show.
Let me take a crack at it. Complementarianism is the view that all people, male and female, are equal in value, but different in roles. And egalitarianism is equal all the way down.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's what Natalie said when she was talking about her child, asking her about what does it mean to be a male. And she said, not worried about what it means to be a male. You need to worry about what it means to be you. Whereas I think Phil would have had a different response, though he didn't say so if he has any children.
I enjoyed that. I like that answer, by the way. I know that it seemed like a bumper sticker, but it helped shake me out of some of my own thinking of this. Yeah, it's irrelevant what it means to be a male or a female, and it's relevant to be you, to know what it means to be you in this world, whoever you are. So don't try to put on some artificial role that society dresses you up with. Discover who you are. I think that is good advice. Now, I do want to say, I want to join Andrew in saying that Natalie was also wrong. And when I get to my bit that I want to talk about, I'll just forecast up front. What I want to talk about is the fact that it is wrong based on the fact that they were both drawing their views from the Bible. And yes, Natalie was drawing some bogus views from the Bible, but the fact is she was still trying to use the Bible to draw her views. And so it's still a bad job at the end of the day. So even though Natalie said a lot of things that I like, there were a few occasions where she got herself twisted up in knots because she's still using the Bible as a guide, and it's a terrible guide on this subject.
It struck me as... Oh, go ahead, Sarah. I'm sorry.
I was going to say she was definitely the more progressive of the two. She certainly could see that there were individuals that you had to take the kind of wider picture. But whereas Phil seemed to be trying to constantly spiritualize the problem, it was always to do with not being pure enough or not being. I just got the impression he was constantly looking at a way to spiritualize it, the flesh being weak and us having inherent problems as being human. So she seemed to be a lot more open to the idea that we are just human and things go a little bit wrong. So the only thing I thought she came out with, which almost made me vomit on the spot, was that she quite liked the hideous idea that dying as a martyr was her goal.
So that's what I was going to talk about that. Stop it.
That was just too bad. Yeah, that was just. I mean, your jaw just drops when she says something like that. You're like, this is
I did a throat
Muslim
vomit.
and jihad and. No, this shouldn't be your goal. I mean, okay, I understand there was some sort of noble I don't know, just it was looked upon as a good thing if you, not a good thing, but certainly as a noble thing if you died as a martyr, but to have it as a goal, maybe it was just the way she didn't quite mean it that way.
No,
but
she did mean it that way.
Vile,
she wants to die for Jesus just like a man can die for Jesus. She wants to die of persecution just as a man dies of persecution. So it is batshit crazy.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You said a second ago that Phil was regularly trying to spiritualize the problem. And the first time that I shook my phone in outrage and actually had to talk back to the phone while I was listening to the podcast was when Phil said, we have to stop looking at the Bible as the problem and start looking at it as the solution in regard to how we should live our gender-oriented lives. And I was shaking the phone in outrage and saying, no, we don't. We've been looking at gender roles through the Bible in Western culture for 2,000 years, and we've failed for 2,000 years. That's why you're having the show. And sadly for Natalie, when she talked about her story, which I accept was incredibly traumatic and formed a lot of the problems in her adult life, according to her, she had these bad experiences when she was growing up, 16 or 17, however old she was. She had these bad sexual experiences, and somehow, and these occurred in a religious context apparently, and somehow she hung on to the religion that allowed it.
That was striking. The fact that she didn't see the irony that she actually had followed what was supposed to be done. She did the whole. I mean, I wrote a couple of Natalie's story. Let me have a look. Yes, she. I mean, it's obviously a very tragic story, but she did the Christian thing. You know, she felt wrong that she'd been involved with this guy, so she married him too young, which happens to a lot of Christians because they, as I say, they want to get the can-do band on their finger. So get the license for the sex license, basically, is what they want to get. So, and they're feeling they're in cycles of shame and failing and all that kind of thing. So, getting married young is quite an evangelical thing, and it can go horribly wrong. And then she was in an abusive relationship with her husband, but she tried to win him over with the purity kind of idea by just constantly forgiving him, so she did it by the book, and she doesn't see that the solution doesn't work. But at the end, she frames it all as God was there in the end. He's love and he loves women and all that sort of thing. And it's me that was the problem. It's always our interpretation that's been wrong. It's always us that has to get the blame. It's like, no, you were given really crummy information and you ran with it. You did the best you could. And it ended you up in hospital with a premature baby. I mean, what sort of, she couldn't see the irony in it. And I thought that was quite sad that I would blame God. That's what she'd been faithful. She'd done the thing she tried as best she could. And it hadn't paid off at all. The solutions don't work, basically, is what it comes down to.
Let me jump in with my set piece here. So the listeners, you don't know, but my co-hosts know, I'm actually rather sick. I've got fever, chills, and pain. I've got the full works. I really want to die. It's that kind of thing. So
this could be a martyr death right here, live on the show.
I'm going to die just for you, listener. So
just don't leave that kind of opening for me in the future. I'm going easy on you. But
the thing is, I may not be able to hang in for the entire show. So I'm going to blurb some things out quickly. And so if you'll give me a couple of minutes, I'm just going to run through some thoughts that I wrote down, and hopefully will be picked up and expanded on. So I started off by saying I think the big problem with both sides is that they are using the Bible as a guide on how to sort out what it means to be a male or female or whatever gender you happen to be in the modern era. And it is not as much that the Bible gives bad advice, it's that the Bible is a bad source to begin with, and you should never use it for that. So a few points. One is that all of the advice, just about all of the advice that we have that comes from Jesus and Paul on the subject of the role of women is based on a literal reading of the Genesis story in Adam and Eve. Both Jesus and Paul had a literal view of Adam and Eve, and they name check Adam and Eve, and Paul does it a few times, and Paul specifically mentions it. It's because the woman sinned and so forth. So right away, if you're one of those Christians who does not believe in the literal reading of Genesis, the first 3 chapters, you should disregard everything that Jesus and Paul have to say on this subject. Even if you listen to them on other things, you should disregard them on this one, because their understanding of what a male and female is and what they were for and how we got this way is based on nonsense. And so that's the first point that I would like to make. You can't end up with a good solution with that as your foundation. Leadership is another point that stood out to me in this. They can talk about equality all they want. There is no equality unless there is equal opportunity to do all of the jobs from bottom to top with both genders, period. And if there's a place in there where a woman can't do strictly because she's a woman, then there is no equality. In this case, Phil said elders. It's the elders' job to be the whatever the force is that keeps the river in check, and then everyone else's job to be the river.
The banks of the river.
The banks and
the
the elders
banks
of the banks
of
of
the
the
river.
And so what he did not express is why it is that a woman could not be a part of the banks of a river. So this is the thing. So if you view women as not fit to lead, you have a problem, and you cannot use words like equality. It's meaningless at that point. The Bible is condescending. I'll just sweep through these very quickly. Women are given away in marriage by men to men. Notice that women don't give their daughters away. Men, it's because they're the property of the man. This is an old tradition based on an old idea. The woman is always the property of the man. The man who owns her currently is going to give her away to a new owner. But she is never the independent force unless her husband dies. And then there's some rules around that. Women are automatically assumed to be the weaker vessel. I just hope to get Sarah wound up and just let her run for a few minutes on that. Husbands aren't...
Before you run away from that, I want to just point the listeners to, they can search CNN for this, the first female troops are being trained in the U.S. Marine Corps, arguably one of our best fighting forces in the United States. We are now training the first platoon of 50 female Marines on Parris Island. They will be trained side by side with their male counterparts. That's happening right now. Last year, the first female to go through RIP, that's Ranger Indoctrination Program, become an airborne ranger. She finished the course. We have a female ranger fighting beside male rangers. And if you still think that women are the weaker vessel, it is a ridiculous notion.
Well, and let's be clear. Asian culture has kind of put the kibosh on this a long time ago. Women have been fighting with swords and samurais for a long time.
Sure.
But then again, they're not a Christian culture historically.
Just wanted to point out that we have women in our most elite fighting forces that are fighting beside men. And regardless of how I might feel about women in combat, they can do the job. And they are doing the job. And to dismiss that is to ignore the very point that disconfirms the idea that women are weaker vessels.
Sure.
I mean, it depends how you define weaker. I don't think there's necessarily a problem with identifying that there are different biological differences in terms of women not having as much testosterone, so less muscle mass and all that kind of thing. That sort of thing doesn't even bother or kind of feature on the scale for me. I'm perfectly happy that they have maybe different hormonal, biological kind of drivers that are different from men. Again, that's not an issue. That maybe they have a higher sense of survival. They're not necessarily as combative in nature. Jordan Peterson has a bit to say about it, doesn't he? He says a lot of men are more likely to be obnoxious and kind of bolshy, and therefore that's what gets them to the top, not necessarily being male, but being more bolshy. So, though that is associated with being male. So I don't know. I mean, I have no issue with there being some differences, and I think the problem occurs when you're talking about science or being able to fly a plane or other jobs that women can do. But I'll be honest, if I was an employer and I had to employ women and or men, I would be tempted to employ men because of the fact that women are more likely to take time off and go, which I know is super controversial, but the reality is if you're running a small business and a woman has to take 1 or 2 years off for childcare and things, there is a difference. I have no issue actually recognizing that. I'm glad there are some things in law that protect them and they can come back to work and all that sort of thing, but I don't fight for this totally equal, we're exactly the same type view. I'm happy to accept some differences, but then and it's never really impacted me. So I've always done what I've wanted to do. I've always been happy to play with lads when I was younger, and gangs and climbing trees and spy games and all. It was all that kind of thing. So, and I didn't want an engagement ring. I had a windsurfer instead. I don't really identify with the women kind of view of childcare and things. I chose to be child free. It's an active choice that. So I've never quite identified with a whole womany kind of repressed type of thing. But that's just me, because I'm very lucky to be in an environment where you're more likely to be evaluated on how many summits you've climbed than whether you're male or female. And the lads I associate with are completely not misogynistic at all, and everyone's kind of it is a bubble I live in. So I appreciate a lot of people encounter some real kind of prejudice. So, but for me personally, it's not a massive issue. So I think you're not actually going to be able to wind me up that much about it, because it's not something I feel very strongly about. For me personally, I do.
Sure. But in our fighting forces, we're not necessarily trying to craft the very strongest person we can possibly craft, because strength is only one part of that equation. We are trying to craft intelligent leaders who make good decisions in morally ambiguous environments. I use that phrase because it just came out of the Pentagon. There's a U.S. Navy SEAL who's being charged with murder of a combatant that was under his care. And so it is not just about strength, though certainly it is about being able to take care of yourself, to be able to carry your pack and your weapons and whatever you have to do.
Strength is the smallest part of it, honestly, because they
right. So yeah, I've got a brother that's an airborne ranger, and he's happy to tell you that there were plenty of rangers stronger than he was. Okay, so it's not necessarily about being strong. It is about being prepared to operate in morally ambiguous environments. And while there are certainly minimum standards, I would think, I'm not a Ranger or a SEAL or Marine Force Recon or any of our other special fighting services, but it is about being able to meet the minimum preparatory standards in each of those categories, whatever they are.
And I would like to just reiterate, Japanese women have been beating bigger, stronger, heavier men for a long time.
Yeah. So, sorry, I'm not going back on what you were saying, Sarah, just defending the right for women to pursue the roles they want to pursue.
Well,
yeah, absolutely. But that's what I'm saying. It's never stopped me. I always did things like physics, where there was only lads and no girls, and personally, I've not experienced this kind of being kept down because I'm a woman. So, but I do appreciate a lot of people do.
Let me climb down this list a little bit more. But I do want to just round that off by saying I don't think the Bible actually was talking about physical strength or weakness. I think it was speaking more generically that women were weaker in general, and that's the problem. It's not that your wife may not be able to beat you in arm wrestling. That wasn't the issue. So, and I think this next one bears that out. So the Ephesians passage that says, "Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ loved the church." That's actually not a good passage for women at all. It's an awful passage for women, because what it does is it says that you're incapable of doing things for yourself, which is exactly how the church is in relation to God. You must ask, permission to do things, and if the Lord will, I can do this and that. It suggests that you need constant supervision and protection, and maybe self-sacrifice, because you are so helpless and kind of stupid. At no point does it ever say, women, love your husbands as Christ loved the church, because there is a very specific role and a very specific idea that the writer of these things, I won't say Paul, had with regard to men and women. And so I put that under a category of the Bible being very condescending toward women in that way. I know that you guys want to jump in. Give me 30 more seconds. Gender is not a binary thing. The Bible offers gender as a binary thing, and I hear preachers today saying God made them male and female, and that's it. And if you think that you're something else, then you're calling God a liar. Well, okay, I'm calling God a liar. Purity. I'll just say that word and move on. And then childbearing. Childbearing is this idea that women are given this great blessing of childbearing that men don't have, and that this is some dispensation that women are given, even that is somewhat salvific. And so we have to kind of parse what the writer of 1 Timothy 2 meant when he was telling women that you've got to be submissive at home because Eve was stupid, but you'll be saved through childbearing. This is the Bible on women. And so for these and many other reasons I don't have time to even introduce, the Bible is absolutely the wrong book to bring to a conversation on gender roles in 2019.
Okay. I'd pick up on the binary thing just from the episode of Unbelievable. There was one point where Phil started saying that Jesus was a great male role model, and then a bit later he said he was kind of like a great female male model. But which was just seemed to be like they were scraping around for kind of views on it, because it was like, well, what is Jesus non-binary now, or is that? That's clearly that would just be so offensive to them. I don't know in what way he's a great female male model.
Well, you see, he cried. Jesus wept.
But that's what men can do. That's fine. It's not a problem. I find all this gender roles and things I never really paid much attention to it, to be fair. As I say, it never really affected me. I know I got some messages through, particularly about the purity culture, which we can talk about, but generally speaking, I didn't really take too much notion. But I just thought it was interesting that Phil sort of said that, and said he's a great male role model and a great female role model, and didn't seem to see the irony about it being maybe binary, therefore, and a spectrum. Then they were happy to talk about spectrum, but not when it comes to transgender people or anything like that. But in the case of Jesus, it was fine. I just thought it was quite amusing.
What I thought was amusing. What I thought was strange was you're saying that there's this Jesus character, and as a skeptic, I obviously don't accept that there's any deity in this story. So you've got this guy who you are claiming expresses the full range of male and female characteristics, right? And it seems to me that is the point that works most strongly against Phil's idea that there is a difference between men and women in regard to the roles that we can exercise. Because even if you accept the story of Jesus as him being all man and all God, right? He's 100% of both of these. Then what you're saying is it is possible to be human and to express the full range of humanity, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman. So then to go behind that with the complementarian view is ridiculous.
Well, you just make it say what you need it to say, don't you, at the end of the day? It's like if you need to, it's no men, no female, and so all the LGBTQI people are sort of saying, oh, there's no male or female in heaven, but suddenly there is. You just make it say whatever you need it to say at the time. Right. So,
They both, and they did. He says it expresses the complementarian view. She says it expresses the egalitarian view, and off they went without realizing that they were both right, and it's why they were also both wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there doesn't seem to be any issue with the fact they can both. There was some classic, if Scripture is clear on X, that perfect sentence. Right, that's the thing that triggers me the most. But Scripture is anything but clear on anything, pretty much. You'll always find somebody to contradict you. So, but he was very much into one-upmanship, old Phil, with his regards to the theology. Scripture clearly says it's X, but you can find another verse that says something else. So, yeah.
Justin,
but nobody seems
sorry,
to want to admit that both could be wrong or one could be right, and somebody else could definitely be wrong at that point. Somebody's wrong. Somebody's wrong out of the two of them, if any of it's true. So
right.
Nobody seems to let that bother them. So it's quite amusing.
So we were all former Christians, and we've had various experiences in the church. I've had church leadership experience. Andrew's had seminary experience. Sarah has had a hell of an experience.
That's very ominous.
And
played, though. I thought that was great.
I'm curious, based on our different pasts, what do you think the Christian justification is for restricting women in leadership roles? I mean, how do they sort that out in their minds without being misogynistic?
I mean, I think I attended a church where women did preach a little bit. I can't remember. I mean, this is the UK in the 80s, so it may well have changed. I think it has. I think most women do now can talk at the front of the church. I do remember as a 9-year-old deciding that I should cover my head and wear a little scarf to church with a nice head covering. Obviously, that was God that had led me rather than just the water I was swimming in, where lots of women turned up with headscarves. So yeah, I mean, but you do get the overall message that there's something not quite. You are second in line. Men are above you. You are weaker. You are subservient. The fathers give the daughters away. All that sort of thing does subtly play, but you can't You don't really necessarily critically analyze it at that stage. You just accept it as a status quo, and there are differences, and you're second in command, and that's it. So. There are some messages that come through, but I never really let them bother me too much. I was lucky like that, but I think whatever toxic rubbish we imbibe in the UK, it's probably ramped up a notch in the US. I mean, things like that, you can only wear dresses to church and things like that. I mean, that's not even on our radar in the UK particularly. But I get the impression you're much more hot on those sort of things. If that's the case between the two nations, and also talking about it 20 years ago. I don't know what it's like today, but...
Andrew?
I don't know exactly what the difference is putting it into words, but I can give a great example of it from this week's show. There was a moment where Phil and Natalie were swapping views. Natalie had made some statement. I can't quote her at the moment. We could scan through and find it. But Natalie expresses some view about Scripture, and Justin comes behind it and actually says to Phil, so, Phil, what does it say?
I missed that. Okay.
I will find the timestamp and send it to you, because it was one of those moments, and the reason you missed it is it slipped by so unobtrusively. It's the sort of thing that we see all the time in conference rooms and boardrooms and meetings and et cetera. And I've spent my fair share of hours in all of those. And it was that thing where Justin was willing to diminish what she had to offer by asking Phil to fill in the sensible gaps. And you should have heard a face slap at the end of it, but Natalie was too nice to call him on it, or Phil. There were several times that I thought, she handled herself impeccably, and I sort of wish that she had called Phil out in a different way. You see this in debates between guys as well. The Sam Harris, Jordan Peterson debate. There were several times when Sam should have just clobbered Jordan Peterson and chose not to. But however we choose to express what men think this difference is, There's a perfect example of it on this show.
So I'm reminded of the example that Phil gave back in Adam and Eve once again, suggesting that Phil is an Adam and Eve literalist and probably a yuck. He should probably, once again be disqualified from reasonable discourse just on that basis. But he was suggesting that things got out of whack the moment that Adam took the role of the woman and the woman took the role of the man. And as if there were set roles that are determined almost by biology.
Did he say that, or more that they weren't acting according to what God wanted? I don't know if it was specific. It was gender specific.
It was gender specific. And so once again, it was one of those places where I wanted to ask through my phone, which is what I was listening to, what are these roles that you were talking about? What do you think it is that the man is inherently supposed to do that the woman is inherently incapable of doing, or that she will somehow screw up? I mean, if you let the woman do this, then everything's going to be screwed up.
David, it seems to me that. Oh, Sarah, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say a quick word: lead. I think that was the only thing I got out of the whole what the men's role was. Lead.
Yeah, and I think that David, as I recall, we shared a time in the Church of Christ, even though not in the same congregations, and I think we used to teach the Garden of Eden story as if women were more easily deceived than men.
Sure,
so you've
because
probably
they're the
heard
weaker
that.
vessel.
Sure.
That's part of what it is to be a weaker vessel.
Right. Now, here's why I think that's nonsense, and I just want to hand this off and see what the two of you say. But it seems to me that we read that story, if we could read it as a true story, which I don't think we can, but even if we could, it seems to me that we read the story the wrong way, because surely Eve, being deceived by a serpent, that is someone in this case who displays all the traits of deity, right? This is someone who can argue with God. So Eve is deceived by deity. Adam is deceived by a human. So which one is likely to be the more easily deceived? Adam is deceived by Eve. He's not deceived by the serpent. So I don't actually read that story that way. Eve wasn't easily deceived. Eve was in a battle of wits with a God. So I think we read it all wrong.
So while you're building your outrage up again, Andrew, talk a little bit about this binary aspect of male and female. God made them male and female, and that's it.
So God, if God made males and females, he certainly did a poor job of understanding his chemistry set. Because when Christians appeal to binary sex or gender characteristics, they're appealing to XX chromosomes, which would be all of the women, or XY chromosomes, which would be all of the men. But that is not the total expression of genetic chromosome pairing. For human sexuality, we have XX, we have XY, we have XXY, we have XYY, we have XXYY, and there are possibly other more exotic pairings that I'm not considering at the moment, but we do not have two genders. And to think so is simply not true to the science that we have. And David, I think before we went on there, you said, look, sometimes we even have children that have gross anatomical traits of both genders, so hermaphrodites. And Christians would gloss over the science, and they would gloss over hermaphrodites to repair this notion that their God created two genders. Well, if he did, he's the one that didn't understand humanity.
There's a lot.
all I
I mean,
got.
there's a lot of binary treating of humanity in the whole of the Bible, isn't it? It is man, woman, dark, night, saved, unsaved. It's just that there's only ever two states: light, dark. There's no sunset. There's no sunrise. There's no grey. There's no. I mean, maybe you can find some of it in there, but it does seem to be a quite binary in the way it treats everything. I don't think it reflects very well the human condition at all. But anyway, I mean, the whole Eden story. Yeah, I thought that got a massive. That was allowed to slide completely, and no problem. It popped up as a point, and I think Justin is quite palpably relaxed amongst friends. You can tell he's quite comfortable in that environment, and so I think quite a lot of things like that were allowed to. Some slammers were allowed to slide, and what sounded very normal to them, all the language they were using, kind of started, making you be a bit triggered if you'd been in that environment and suddenly stepped out of it. Now you realise just how freaking weird it can sound. So there was some fantastic little thing. Lots of some of the Christianese. I'd love to just take a second there just to talk about some of the things that we're not used to seeing that, because often we have an atheist and a Christian in the show, and there was two Christians and they were talking in their language that makes total sense. So it's not talents, it's not and strengths, it's not things you've worked at, it's giftings. It's not celebrating uniqueness and difference, it's reveling in God's glory and his way. It's not marriage is a union that God has created. It's nothing to do with the fact it's a consensual contract between two adults with agency. Nothing to do with that. All to do with God creating a union. So, and then there were some classic ones like there's no problematic passages, just passages that cause us problems. And again, those are all those little things that kind of add to the pile of why you're the problem and you the human, have messed it up, and we're the issue. So I'm calling BS on that. I say, don't put up with this. Stop it. You're not the problem. There are problematic passages. And it's just and some of the other language. Men are hungry for this kind of thing rather than just they want or desire. And he was very much into importing his worldview, saying Natalie's importing her worldview into the church rather than the other way around of us exporting God out. So then just a little subtle one, which I don't know if you picked up on, but if you abuse your wife, that's why your prayers aren't answered. 1 Peter 3:17 he quoted. And whilst, yes, I can sort of see the rationale behind that one, where don't expect to be a good guy and good in front of God if you're slapping your wife about being behind the scenes. But there was another one to throw on the pile of why your prayers aren't answered. Blame yourself, blame someone. So I'm sure there's some poor Christian chap that thinks that his prayers aren't being answered because he once had an argument with his wife or something. There's all those little subtle things in there that were easy to miss, and it was really jarring when you've not been in that swimming in that water for a while, and you suddenly realise the language they use and how they're framing everything. And God is good. It's just our interpretation of the problem that's of Scripture that's a problem. So there's so many things that were left to slide, that the misogynistic comments or the deferring to the man in the show didn't feature. It was more some of the language that they were using that made me chuckle, but. I don't know if you picked up on any of that.
Well, so you mentioned the idea that your prayers may not be answered if you're abusing your wife, and I'm thinking, well, that's a pretty light punishment, isn't it? So you're
true as well.
You're a wife abuser
the other way,
and the most God has done to you is, well, I'm not going to answer your prayer this time. I'm thinking, if God is that active and you're actively abusing your wife, maybe God does something a little bit more severe.
I'd like to point out that he's also not answering her prayer.
No.
Because I'm pretty sure she's not sitting around going, thank you, sir, may I have another?
No, exactly. But it's just another reason, blame the human again for the prayers not being answered, and it's just another one to hit people over the head with, even if they've not done anything wrong. I suppose that's what I'm getting at. I'm sure if you're beating your wife, you probably deserve a good a good few non-answered prayers. But as you say, it's not a big punishment, but it's just another thing that you can, well, maybe I spoke to my wife a little bit unkindly that day, and that's why I'm not getting answers to my prayers, and I've got to berate myself, and you're slapping yourself with the whip to kind of humble yourself over things that are just you just had an argument.
And the wife's prayer is not being answered because the husband is not in good standing with God. So that is exactly how the church would have dealt with it from my side of the church. They would have simply said, look, the husband is the head of the house, and there are consequences to the husband doing wrong. And so one of the consequences is that prayers from your house are not answered.
I mean, there was she didn't actually support this view, did she? But she said that two Christians that she had been talking to said that you will take the consequences of your wife's sin, and you're kind of the head of the household, the representative. So she did push back on that, which was just an awful concept. But I guess some people believe that as well. So
Andrew's been trying to wrestle for the mic for a while. Andrew?
Well, I was going to swap topics just for a second because you mentioned that you might not make it through the entire show. I still hope you do. But there was something we were talking about off mic, and I wanted to mention it here before you have to go, if in fact you do have to.
Please let it be purity culture.
It's well, it gets us started there.
Okay.
That is exactly where we're going. In fact, I'm going to take us all the way to the heart of purity culture, and then we can all express our outrage. So here we go. I've said in a past podcast, Sarah, you and I were on together actually, that if God only created two genders, male and female, with those two genders, he actually created 4 ways to express human sexuality. Now, I was wrong. There are actually 6 ways with only 2 genders to express human sexuality, so I'll just go through them. Male, male, female, female, male, female, male self-gratification, female self-gratification, and simply not practicing human sexuality or to choose to be asexual. And so if you're the kind of person who says, oh, well, God did a great thing by creating 2 genders, well, what you're actually saying is only in 1 of 6 cases in this God-ordained, God-created universe is there a right way. 1 in 6. There's a 1 in 6 way of practicing your human sexuality the right way. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a silly notion. I think it is always worth pointing out that there are lots of ways for us to express our human sexuality, and I don't actually give a damn what the Bible says about it. Because if God did this, he did it wrong. He simply did it wrong.
And set you up to fail. You can't, it's just, you're not going to, as a teenager or whatever, you're set up to fail on this particular issue, whether it's be, self gratification or not. Let's be honest, you're just not going to make it. It's inhumane to expect people to do otherwise.
If I can maybe push us closer to that transition, I just had an observation about marriage that I know I'm going to forget later as we talk about it. But when you're saving sex for marriage, one of the problems with that is that you make sex too much of what marriage is. It becomes too important. And a marriage can't sustain that, because at some point you will cool down, and it doesn't take all that long. So,
speak for yourself, sir.
Yes, you will cool down. Way before you get to Andrew and my age, I promise. So that's going to happen.
Again, speak for yourself, sir.
Myself, and for all those it applies. So if your marriage is based on that, your marriage is going to fail. And the problem with marriages ending in divorce at about a 50% rate, that's true for Christians as well as non-Christians. It's not that Christians live in this special bubble where their marriages are more successful. They are not. And so you are really setting yourself up to turn sex into the main thing about your marriage. If you were saying, okay, I'm going to save my marriage, my sex for marriage. And so so as you can tell, I don't actually buy into any aspect of the purity culture. And I actually think that it's probably a bad idea to try to wait for marriage before you have sex. So with that, I'm going to step away from the microphone and go cough and die a little bit.
You're right. And you
Sure,
don't
did
hear...
you guys have... Oh, yeah, I think you were...
Hello, what question were you asking me?
Oh, just
Did you guys what?
have purity culture? That was going to ask.
I don't think it's as batshit mental as it is in the States with your rings and your kind of dancing with your dad type evenings that you have. We definitely had that.
It's just creepy.
It
It's
is
just
creepy. It's totally creepy. I mean, so we definitely had some talk about it, but again, they don't really address the problem, and people are finding it harder to come out. Even on that show, they weren't really coming out strongly on you must save sex for marriage. That is the only way. Even Natalie was kind of wavering on it. She even talked about Christians that were okay with polyamory. I mean, again, I didn't even know that was even on the kind of more progressive spectrum, whether that really was the case. So the UK has obviously changed quite a bit. But we definitely had sin. Your body's dangerous, the flesh, and your body is weak, it's sinful, it's broken, it's gross, it's evil. You fail yourself, and also as you will be taking the lads down with you, it's your fault. So we definitely got messages like that, which I think are really toxic and wrong. I think it's better to say you're amazing. Your body is what houses you. Treasure it, honor it, be glad of it, and all that it entails, which will include some sexuality as you grow older. So it was very much, again, binary. And then there's so many sicky things with it as well. Phil was saying, treat women as sisters. Well, good luck bringing that into the bedroom. That's not just creepy. There's a whole don't date unless you want to marry, which forces people into young marriages.
So bad.
Divorce rate. I mean, I was very lucky. I got married at 23, but that could be very detrimental. Really, I would certainly, if I had a daughter, not encourage that. I think it's much better if you do live together and see your compatibility.
Yep.
And there's lots of unhappy people. The whole kind of giving Jesus your virginity, again, it's all just a bit creepy. And there's the kind of two becoming one. I mean, yes, use it as poetry or whatever, but there's no magic that really happens. Biologically speaking, virginity isn't a thing. You can't really measure it. At no point do you become one person with somebody else. You're always two distinct people. It's not a thing. So there's so much thing about shame and and how you should feel if you have digressed, and how you should feel guilty, and you take away everybody's autonomy and agency, and you're set up to fail by God, because He gives you the ability to feel hungry, let's say, but you're not allowed to eat. So I just think it's appalling. I really think it needs to stop. There's definitely some talks about young people having sex and health and sex education and health and that sort of thing. That's fine, but this purity thing is actually toxic, and I'm happy to say how that happens in a bit. But if you want to jump in, Andrew, and say what your feelings of the message. Were the messages different as lads? Were your messages kind of
Oh yeah. Yeah, sure. Just to take a second on one of the things you mentioned, it seems to me incoherent to say that it is possible for a young woman to be responsible for a guy's sexual impropriety. And yet to then turn around and say that at some point in the future when they're married, he can be responsible for her sin in any way whatsoever, in the sense that he's the head of the house, or he somehow guides her, or she is more easily deceived, and therefore he is more intellectually culpable, or anything like that. If she has the capacity to influence his behavior, to somehow lead him into sin, it seems incoherent to then say he's responsible for that at some point in the future. So I don't like the notion to begin with. But yes, in my part of the world, the Southeast United States, we certainly were raised differently as young men. In fact, in some sense, we preyed on the girls who were most innocent. It's sort of how we did it. You want to date the girl who is the most innocent one in the pack, right? Because there's this notion that girls who were more experienced were somehow bad.
Well, exactly, because your value's defined by your virginity. The more partners you've had, the more damage you are, the less value you have. And that's just toxic and shaming and degrading. And it doesn't even speak to the fact that actually you've got more experience, and in a healthy way, that can be a good thing. So, yeah. So it wasn't to kind of be predator against these innocent girls. And it was more just that they were prized as well for the boys, was it?
Well, they were, and anyone who thinks I'm wrong, if you think I'm wrong about guys being raised differently than girls, or that guys are slightly more predatory, or that guys are slightly hypersexualized, if you think I'm wrong, I simply want to know where the movement is for guys to wear purity rings.
Mm. Yeah, there's definitely a double standard.
Right. If you think I'm wrong, if you think that male expression of sexuality in young people is equivalent to female expression of sexuality, and that we train them both the same, show me the movement for guys wearing purity rings.
So let me just add that the entire idea of female purity is about creating a prize for a male. So you stay pure until marriage. It's not about making your experience better. It's about the male having a prize. And this is why in Deuteronomy some of those strange laws about rape and such seem so funny to our ear, because what's going on is a man is bespoiling a woman. It is not about him doing something bad to the woman. It's about him bespoiling some other man's future prize.
Possession. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so that's what's kind of so disgusting about this. The idea that the one where a lot of non-Christians use, where they say, well, so if you rape the maiden and she doesn't scream or what have you, the man has to pay the father of the one he raped the bride price and then marry her, and then he can't divorce her. But from their perspective, that seemed like a pretty good thing, because the woman was just the property, and now that she's been bespoiled, obviously no man's going to want her, and so this guy is stuck with her. Now that's the thing that they were trying to say. This is the Bible on purity culture, and so if you find yourself thinking that purity and that sexual purity somehow makes sense, you need to think a little bit harder on where this comes from, the genesis of it, and you'll realize, no, this is a pretty poison well right here. No ideas about female purity that come from the Bible are any good. Jettison it. And we can talk about whether it makes sense to stay. By the way, I feel yucky calling it purity at all. Being sexual does not make you impure. There's nothing. The opposite of sexual purity is sexual impurity. Well, how do you become sexually impure? You have sex. Well, I don't think so.
Purity is the value you give to an object, not a person. It doesn't apply to people. It's not a thing. It doesn't exist. We're trying to defend something that doesn't exist. It's something it is the value of an object, not a person. So,
Sarah,
as you say,
you
could, when you kind of read the Bible through modernist eyes, and they're always going on about marriage, etc. As you say, you could pay a fine after raping a person and take them as a wife. You could marry more than one person. You could kill a combatant and marry their wife because it was better than enslaving. So yes, okay, there was some progression there in terms of giving people dignity and rights and things. Maybe it was better, some of these ideas, but we don't need to. We're separated now by millennia of culture and time, and we don't have to view this thing in the same way. So you don't need to view that in the same way, and you don't need to view the purity culture in the same way. And it's out of step again now, and it's not healthy. I mean, everything to do with repression or you've had prohibition in the States, haven't you, with alcohol, and that didn't exactly work out well. So we know it just comes out in unhealthy ways. We look at the Catholic Church. It's just not the way to go. You need to accept it, embrace it, and work with it. So
Natalie talked about the idea that guys were, I think she used the phrase hypersexualized, and but that she thought that was she was defending the notion that girls are as equally interested in sex as boys are. Now, I am XY as far as I know. I've never been a girl. That much I am. Well, probably in the womb, actually, since we all start off that way. But my question is actually, as young girls, are girls as interested in exploring the bounds of sex as boys are?
Why shouldn't they be? Absolutely. I mean,
sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's just painted as being different in the UK, as between the sexes, isn't it? It's boys, that's all they think about. But the only thing that's relevant to Christians is a woman, it can only be in touch with her sexuality once she is a married woman, basically having kids, and that's it. So because I never jived with that anyway, I was always like, I'm not having kids, they're too much work. Sorry, Andrew, I know you've got one on the way, but I was just like, I've voiced up to this. I know how much work and cost they are. It's of no interest to me. So, I never kind of, I always pushed back against that anyway. So again, it didn't bother me too much, but it's definitely a message you get. It's definitely a message that's out there.
And how does that work? That on your, I'm sorry, Nick. How does that work? That on your wedding night, you're then all of a sudden,
exactly.
All of a sudden, at the moment of truth, you're now an interested, knowledgeable, active, willing, educated participant.
But that's why there's so many women who talk about the trauma of it. And that's the thing you don't hear in the church, that the people who come out of it the other end, sometimes deconverting, or just generally Christian women who do wait for the wedding night. There's too much pressure. There's too much stock given to it. And then they wonder why it's a big failure and they're rubbish at it or whatever. It's just, you're just supposed to turn it on like that. Well, because you've signed a piece of paper. It's lunacy.
So before we head to the conclusion, I want to touch on one other aspect of this program that I don't think was talked about really in the Unbelievable episode, and I think it's important that we address it. So the title of the program had the Me Too movement in it, and they talked a little bit about the Church Too movement. So I don't really want to talk about the Me Too movement so much. We know what that is. But I do want to acknowledge that the church has as much problem with men raping and or molesting women as outside of the church. This is not something that, once again, is the church is immune to. And so what is the problem here with the church? I would think that it may be even more problematic when it's the church, because the church has this protected status of this is something ordained by God, and ministers have this protected status that they are chosen by and ordained by God, not just humans, and so they have even more power. And then when you add to this power dynamic the idea that women are not allowed to attain ultimate leadership in so many churches, and so even if women are allowed to preach, it's just at a church where they don't think that preaching is a particularly leadership role. The places where it is leadership then tend to be something else, like elders or such. And so it seems almost as if the church is set up for abuse. And no amount of spiritual solutions, quote unquote, is going to fix the fact that it is a power dynamic that is designed to put men in such a position where women have to submit to them, and that is just a recipe for abuse. Is there an actual solution for this?
Are you talking about like a secular solution to generally sexuality, or the problems with the church? 'Cause
The problems with the church in particular, because honestly, if there's one place where you should expect it not to happen, if you take the spiritual look at it, it should be the church. The church, there should be no abuse in the church. But of course, there is abuse, and I argue once again, it's probably worse when it's the church than other places because of that power dynamic. I think it's so much more out of whack than in other places.
Well, when you're in church, there's an expectation that you are safe. Just adding to your point.
Right. There's an expectation that you're safe. Parents throw their kids in a daycare, full of people they don't know anything about. New couples go in and, put their marriage problems in front of a preacher who doesn't have any credentials. Women end up in closed door sessions, where they can be easily manipulated. And these things happen, once again, at the same rate as it does outside of the church, if not more. So once again, is there a way that we can maybe start addressing actual solutions or possible solutions?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't begin in church. It begins at home. I've got 2 stepchildren as well as another child on the way, and I'll simply say that one of the ways to keep your children safe is to educate them about their own bodies. They don't have private parts. They have a penis, or they have a vagina. They have breasts. They have anatomical parts that they are free to talk about. And by giving children the freedom to talk about themselves and to express themselves about abuse, you give them the ability to perhaps not stop the abuse, but to reduce it by being able to talk about it more openly than they can when you make sex a taboo word, or when you make their body parts unexpressible. Now, this is not me talking. This is the American Psychological Association. This is the APA. Part of stopping abuse is allowing survivors to talk about it in clear terms.
Okay. I think that's a good beginning, a good practical beginning for everyone everywhere. I'm going to actually. I was paused for a little bit. I was trying to decide whether I was going to go here or not. So Andrew, you remember the conversation that we had either yesterday or Friday. I don't remember which it was about this. I'm going to propose one of those solutions. I think the church should be regulated. I think it should be regulated heavily. I think that all preachers have to have some type of secular state licensing. Not a religious license per se, but a secular license that says, okay, you're okay with kids, and you are not going to give terrible advice to people who are vulnerable, and they should be licensed and bonded in case something does happen. In all of this, not because it's the church and I hate the church, is because they are people who are placed in positions of authority over vulnerable people in our society. And it is one of the only institutions of its kind that so I'll let you finish my thought.
Sarah, what do you think? I spoke up about part of a solution.
I think it's quite an interesting thing about regulating it. I know when I was at church and I helped with the kids and stuff, I had to get a criminal record check and a few things. So they do a few bits. And there was quite within Vineyard, which was the branch I was, the John Wimber movement thing. We weren't allowed to take a kid to the toilet without another adult. We weren't allowed to be alone with a kid in a room without. Well, I mean, at the time I thought it was a little bit sad, but maybe in today's society that's what's needed. Ultimately, I think we have to keep talking about purity, this purity culture as a religious sexual repression, and repression is never, ever good. And I think the Christians don't have practical solutions. They don't like saying it, but essentially they say no sex before marriage, but they've got no idea what to do with gays or teenagers having sex or frustrated single 20-year-olds or people who aren't married or, nothing. Baby Jesus isn't the answer. Jesus and Paul weren't married. There's no model to follow. There's nothing that they can say. And we heard Phil on a couple of occasions just saying his solution was, admit you're weak and sinful and you're dependent on God. Well, I'm sorry, that's a really kind of unempowering posture to take. I think you should take control, take your responsibilities, put your big boy pants on, and start dealing with your life. He kept bringing it back to Jesus and the church and spiritualizing the problem. So I think that's one thing they should stop doing. It's not a spiritual problem. It's just part of being human. Every time, Natalie's story, even her bad man was because he didn't have good Christian instruction. And the good man that she married was because he had read the scripture. That's what Phil says. And whilst you've got people kind of giving that as an idea, as a solution, there's going to be problems. Purity isn't the problem. The purity. He was saying purity isn't the problem. We are, and if they keep framing the human condition as toxic and evil and sinful, and the body as flesh, and then you're going to have constantly issues. I think the solution are secular ones. Children should be taught what a stable, committed relationship looks like, how to honor themselves, keep themselves safe, how to engage in relationships in a mindful way, not to be ashamed of their bodies and their desires, learn what they like, what they don't like, explore it, kick out the shame, and push back on things that tell you that it's not human or natural. So that's really my feeling. I think you need to live integrated lives where your body, mind, and the part of your sexuality is all communicating. And I don't think Christianity goes anywhere close to that. I think it represses it and it's toxic. There you go. And I managed to say all that without being completely triggered.
Well, you've done better than I have. We're all over the age of consent, and I dare say we've all consented a time or two by now. Here's one of the things that I find shocking about using the New Testament as some sort of guide for human sexuality. It doesn't teach us anything about human sexuality. Yeah. Now, it does talk about not having sex, but let me just ask among friends here. Can either of you name a single thing that you learned about adult sexual relationships from the Bible?
Nothing.
No.
It's literally nothing. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely nothing.
Zero.
Okay, yeah. I can't either. And if there is a sillier thing in the world to do than to appeal to the Bible as a human sexual guide, when the three of us who are former Christians with a broad range of Christian experience, right? I mean, we're sort of multinational here, and none of us could come up with a single thing. If I could leave our listeners with one idea, and I wouldn't leave them with just one, but if I could leave them with one, it is that the Bible is not a sexual guide. You can't learn anything about sex from the Bible. And to take its notions of purity seriously when it has absolutely nothing to teach us about adult sexual relationships is absolutely intolerable. Put it on the scrap heap of history and walk away.
So, Sarah, I'm going to leave you with the last word, and before I do that, I'll just give my last word on the matter. Sex is not wrong. Sex does not make you impure. There is no context in which sex between consenting adults is wrong. And so the guilt that's associated with it, that has to go. And the shame associated with it has to go. And the pressure on marriages, it was just recently, not that long ago, in historical terms, that the United States of America recognized in all 50 states a thing called marital rape. Before that time, it was okay for a husband to rape their wife because it wasn't rape.
Yep.
And so that's a nonsense idea. These are ideas all that come from religion. That your body is not your own. No, your body is your own. It actually is your own. It doesn't matter if you're married, and that having sex before wedlock is somehow a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. Your repressed parents might think it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't make you a bad person. Finally, when it comes to churches, do not put yourself under the authority of sexually repressed men. Just don't. And if there's some type of culture or religion or doctrine in your church that keeps leaders from having normal sexual relations, you should run, not walk away from that church.
I'll amen that.
Well said. Yeah. I mean, if that's your bit, I think you said it all. Really, I just if anybody's listening that associates sex with shame, that it should be something that's celebrated, as you say, obviously with the caveat of consenting adults. But take back agency and autonomy, and don't take any advice from a book is now really out of date on this issue. And that's really all that I've got to say.
Yeah. I mean, everything in the Bible about sex, just remember, folks, it comes based on a woman listening to the advice of a talking snake and then eating fruit. And everything that your preacher or Christian parents have told you about sex flows from that idea. If you think that idea is batshit crazy as I do, you should ignore pretty much everything that comes from those sources.
True that.
Loud cheers.
So with that said, thank you, Andrew and Sarah, for joining us this time, and there'll be more shows in the future. One day we will actually have an official website and official launch. But right now, folks, if you got this program, however you got it, thanks for being tenacious enough to find it. I hope you enjoyed it.
Well done for soldiering through as well.
Thank you both.
Okay, bye.